Hello, in this video we'll be talking about unit testing or MVC applications. Unit testing, basically the definition is that you're testing small pieces of production code. You are testing it in isolation with the rest of the application, and you're only testing what needs to be tested, not like everything possible. Those are some guidelines that we are going to stick by when we write our unit tests. The other thought is that test-driven development is another TDD, that's the concept, where the idea is that you don't think about unit testing as something that you have to do at the end of a project, but rather you start your development with unit testing in mind. The reason why I say it is anytime you want to make sure your code is unit testable, you may have to like make certain choices in how you approach your design. For example, like static methods are really hard to unit test when you use a framework. So that is something that you might want to avoid if you want your code to be unit testable. It is also possible for some areas of your code that you don't write unit tests for, and that is okay. But the idea is that you're testing small pieces of code at a time in isolation. So, at any point in time, it is not mind-boggling to trace a bug. That's the whole idea. So unit testing is done at a really small, code level. We are going to be writing code to test our code. That is kind of what we are going to do today. So like I said before, we want to be able to test code in like small chunks, and then we want to be able to test them in isolation. So for example, I have this MVC Music Store application here. Here. If you just look at the shopping cart controller, we added a business logic layer, if you remember. So this guy, see, this is where we talk about inversion of control. Basically what's happening is this controller, shopping cart controller, is dependent on the shopping cart class and music store DB class. So it has a very tight coupled dependency on these two classes. So when we write tests to test this shopping cart controller, we are going to be not just testing the shopping cart controller, but also testing the actual database and the business logic and all of it. That is not desirable. We want to be able to test in isolation. When you test the shopping cart controller, you should be writing tests that truly only test the shopping cart controller. If you want to test the database context, you would be like writing a separate set of tests for that purpose. If you want to be testing your business layer, which is the shopping cart, you would be writing separate tests for that purpose. Right now, the way it is set up, there is a lot of dependency. So reversing the dependency and making sure that each and every one of your class does not have any dependency, or there is a way for you to isolate the dependency. That is basically what is called as inversion of control. This is covered a little bit in chapter 13. We are not going to go into great depths about it, but this is going to play a key role in how we write our unit tests. What I mean is that there should be some way for our test to be able to send in objects for this DB context and cart without actually making database calls. For example, we know like what the shopping cart has. It has like cart items, right? We should be able to like mark up cart items and send into this index controller instead of us actually having to test all the three classes together. So that is what is the desirable approach. And we would use a concept called as dependency injection for that when we write our tests. But just to give you an idea of what we are going to be covering, we are going to make sure that our unit testing is going to be testing small pieces of code in isolation. The other thing that I want to like talk about is also writing only code for the code you write, not for the auto-generated, the framework, MVC framework code that gets generated automatically. We don't want to be testing all of it because somebody already tested it and then released it. So you want to make sure that you write your unit tests only for the code that you change, not for everything that is out there. You don't want to like test this DB context to death because it has been tested by somebody already, and it is part of our MVC package. So you don't want to be spending time testing that. The other concept that is nice to use but not like that practical in my opinion is to be able to make sure that each and every test is written only to test one single situation. That's a little hard. You normally want to like not only like see what view is returned, but also like what the model elements are, stuff like that. But it's the idea here is to not make your test so complicated, then the test itself becomes error prone. You want to keep it really simple. You are always testing for like a specific situation, and then if you want to test for other situations, you would write more tests. So that's the idea. Okay, so we will be covering how to write unit tests in the Visual Studio 2017 for our controllers. We do not write unit tests for our views because it is more of a user interface oriented area of MVC. So there are other tools out there like Selenium that are mainly for like graphic user interface type testing, web testing. That would be what would be used. You want to keep the logic in your views to a minimum. Everything that has to be sent to the view has to be really clean and really simple. So you want to keep them either in the controller or in your business logic or in some other class, not specifically in your views. Okay. I think that's about it. So we are going to be like starting with a new code base for this project.